My ranch had stayed in the family for 5 generations, until Karen Thorne, self-appointed empress of the HOA, decided my compost pile was a disgrace. What began as petty complaints snowballed into full-blown chaos. My goats were labeled emotional. "Saboteurs!" She knocked my drone out of the sky, and her backyard became a chemical wasteland. All I wanted was to live in peace. But Karen was obsessed with proving that suburban bylaws outweighed logic, until something buried beneath my own land turned everything upside down. I'm Silas Blackwood, and my life is written in sun-scorched soil, sweat-soaked shirts, and the creak of old fence posts settling back into place. These hands of mine aren't unfamiliar with hard work. They've felt the blistering heat of August sun beating down on cracked earth. They've wrangled stubborn calves in the dead of night, and they've swung a hammer more times than I could count to patch up wind-battered fences before the next storm rolled in. My land, Blackwood Ranch, isn't just where I live. It's who I am. This patch of earth has been passed down from father to son for 5 generations, through droughts, floods, cattle diseases, and recessions. It's not polished, not pristine, but it's ours. And in all that time, it never changed hands, and it never bent to anyone else's will but nature's. Out here, the horizon stretches wide enough to quiet the soul, the air smells of hay and freedom, and the only laws worth following are those written by wind, rain, and time. Or at least that's how it used to be, before a group of city transplants armed with HOA bylaws and a taste for beige conformity decided they knew better than God Almighty and generations of land stewardship. They called themselves the Ridgebrook Estates Homeowners Association, but I only ever saw one person when I thought of them, a self-appointed monarch in pastel blazers and pearl earrings, Karen Thorne. She wasn't just the president of the HOA, she was the HOA, the enforcer of everything soulless and sterile, the high priestess of orderliness, the woman who could spot a blade of wild grass growing the wrong direction from 3 lots away and consider it an existential threat. Karen arrived like a storm in slow motion. She and her husband moved into Ridgebrook about 1.5 years ago, settling into a massive, soulless house that looked like every other box in that overbuilt neighborhood. Row after row of near-identical homes, each with lawns so small you'd be forgiven for thinking they were carpet samples. The development crept up to my eastern fence line like an invasive species, swallowing up the open land with vinyl siding and ornamental shrubs. From the very start, Karen made her feelings about my ranch painfully clear. Where I saw a heritage of grit, she saw an unsightly blemish. To her, Blackwood Ranch wasn't a testament to perseverance. It was a leftover relic from a less refined time. It clashed with her aesthetic, offended her curated lifestyle, and most importantly, it dared to exist without her approval. She looked at my fields, golden with sun-dried grass, dotted with hardy brush, and saw nothing but disobedient weeds. She heard the distant bleating of goats, the low bellow of cattle, the crow of a rooster greeting the dawn, and declared it all unbearable rural noise pollution. She didn't hear the rhythm of ranch life. She heard chaos interrupting her morning yoga routine. To Karen, my land wasn't just rough, it was offensive. A dusty testament to a way of life she didn't understand and certainly didn't respect. In her eyes, my ranch was an act of aggression. Not in what it did, but simply in what it was. My cattle weren't livestock, they were potential threats. My barn wasn't history, it was visual clutter. My goats? An unauthorized biological presence. She wanted the countryside sterilized, and my ranch was standing in the way of her dreamscape, an artificial Eden of silence, symmetry, and HOA-sanctioned uniformity. And from the moment she laid eyes on my land, she made it her personal mission to either tame it or destroy it. Like most conflicts, it began with something laughably basic, my compost pile. I've always believed in collaborating with the land, not trying to tame it. The compost heap, tucked neatly behind the barn, was a miracle of decay, deep black, nutrient-rich soil in progress. It never reeked, never drew pests nastier than the occasional squirrel, and was essential to my garden. But Karen Thorne, it seemed, possessed an uncanny radar for anything that didn't match her sterile ideal, a bizarre fixation with clean visual harmony. The opening shot arrived in a thick ivory-colored envelope embossed with the Ridgebrook Estates HOA seal, a ridiculous emblem showing a manicured rosebush. The letter, composed in a painfully elaborate typeface, stated firmly, "To the resident of Parcel 7B, also known as Blackwood Ranch. The Ridgebrook Estates HOA Board has observed the presence of an unauthorized and offensive bioremedial monstrosity, more commonly known as a compost heap. This unacceptable aggregation of natural debris violates Article 4, Section 2, Clause C of the Community's Covenants, Conditions, and Restrictions, CC and Rs, particularly regarding storage of decaying substances. We have received numerous complaints of unpleasant odors and mysterious environmental disturbances, which we believe are tied to your unapproved composting practices. You are hereby instructed to dismantle and permanently dispose of the unsightly and unsanitary pile within 48 hours or incur an escalating fine of $500 daily, along with potential legal measures. Your adherence to Ridgebrook Estates' clean and orderly atmosphere is not just appreciated, it is required." I read it to my cattle dog, Red, who tilted his head with a puzzled look, as if to say, "Wait, she actually called your compost pile a monstrosity? What planet is she from?" The very next morning, like clockwork, Karen's pristine white luxury SUV, gleaming as though it had just rolled off a showroom floor, pulled up along my fence line. On its door, an oversized magnetic decal announced the Ridgebrook HOA like it was a federal agency. She parked with theatrical precision, aligning her tires exactly parallel to the gravel. The door swung open and out stepped Karen Thorne herself in all her authoritarian suburban glory. She wore a tailored pantsuit in a shade of yellow so bright it could have caused temporary blindness, somewhere between lemon zest and runway caution tape. The fabric shimmered faintly in the sun, making her look less like a concerned neighbor and more like a fashion-forward dictator on vacation in Monaco. Clutched tightly in both hands was her weapon of choice, a glossy clipboard covered in plastic tabs, stickers, and a laminated HOA violation chart. She held it like a riot shield, poised for confrontation. Her expression was a mix of high priestess righteousness and something just shy of a meltdown, lips pursed, nostrils twitching, eyes wide with the kind of intensity normally reserved for cult leaders and unstable TV judges. Not a strand of her platinum bob dared move in the light breeze. It was lacquered into absolute submission, a helmet of suburban authority. Even the wind seemed afraid to ruffle it. "Mr. Blackwood!" she shrieked across the fence, her voice cutting through the peaceful morning like a chainsaw through silk. Birds scattered. My chickens flapped in alarm, squawking and kicking up dust as they darted away. "I see you have once again chosen to flagrantly ignore the explicit written order of the Ridgebrook Homeowners Association regarding your putrid pile of fermenting filth." She jabbed the clipboard in my direction like it was a sword. "We gave you 48 hours! 48! Not 48 minutes of smug defiance! Do you grasp the magnitude of your insolence? The sheer disregard for the well-being of this carefully curated, meticulously sanitized neighborhood? You've not just violated code, you've shattered the spiritual equilibrium of Ridgebrook." I leaned back against the fence post, wiping dirt off my hands onto my jeans, trying to maintain a tone of civility that didn't match the absurdity before me. "It's compost, Miss Thorne. It feeds the soil, keeps my land productive. And it's 100 yards away from your property line. It's not doing anyone harm." Karen's breath caught in her throat like she'd just witnessed a felony in progress. Her eyes widened, comically large now, and her jaw hung open in disbelief before snapping shut with force. "Not doing harm?" she gasped, clutching her chest as if I'd just fired a cannon into her azaleas. "It's a breeding ground for airborne contagions. Yesterday, my gardener, poor sweet Santiago, almost passed out from the toxic miasma drifting over your fence. He reported a swarm, a full-on cloud, of disturbed, likely deranged, flying insects buzzing in erratic patterns." She flailed one arm dramatically at the sky as if expecting the bugs to reappear for emphasis. "They were agitated, Mr. Blackwood. Disturbed. That's not normal pollinator behavior. Do you have any idea the kinds of microbial diseases they could be harboring? West Nile, botulism, emotional destabilization, My azaleas, my award-winning HOA-featured azaleas, have begun to wilt, Mr. Blackwood. The leaves are curling in sorrow. They are literally mourning their proximity to your biological monstrosity. I raised an eyebrow, brushing a bit of sawdust from my sleeve. Ma'am, you're standing next to a ranch, I said calmly. We've got insects. We've got animals. That's how the land works. It's called nature. Might not smell like lavender-scented dryer sheets, but that's the smell of living earth. Nothing harmful about it. Not on my horizon, she screeched, her voice climbing into a register that could have cracked glass. And let me assure you, Mr. Blackwood, my legal representative, the Honorable Mr. Beaumont Fitzwilliam III of Sterling and Fitzwilliam concurs entirely. This is without question a case of ecosystemic degradation via unsanctioned rural waste. You are dragging down the entire community's equity with your archaic land rituals. She took a deep breath, lifting the clipboard once again like a judge, about to hand down a sentence. Prepare yourself, sir, for the full might of Ridgebrook's enforcement protocol. You will be inundated with formal documentation. You will be subpoenaed, fined, and buried beneath an avalanche of procedural paperwork. I will see you in court, and I will prevail. The wild shall not trespass upon Ridgebrook. I didn't say a word, just stood there, watching her vibrate with rage, the sun glinting off her name badge like a second sun. As the chickens slowly returned to pecking the gravel, and Red wandered over to sniff at her SUV's tires. Karen was declaring war, over a compost pile. I merely shook my head. She honestly appeared to believe that my compost pile was some unholy omen, a festering symbol of anti-suburban chaos and a personal attack on her lifestyle. For the next 7 days, I received daily deliveries of officially stamped letters, each more absurdly phrased than the last. One accused my compost of distorting local air pressure, claiming it made her patio furniture tremble and caused her internet to glitch during online yoga sessions, what she dubbed a direct digital interference. In return, I sent her a small pouch of finished compost with a note, for your azaleas. Might settle them down. Good for your soul, too. She sent it back in a triple-sealed hazardous material bag, along with a complaint to the county public health office alleging I was conducting biological attacks through organic waste, a threat to both human well-being and metaphysical balance. She even suggested my compost might be a covert training site for engineered mutant insects capable of infiltrating residential spaces. But that was merely her opening act. Karen's next chosen battleground was my modest herd of pygmy goats. I had around 12 of them, led by Gus, a cranky yet endearing billy with a beard like a gold prospector. They were great for clearing weeds, calm-tempered, and downright amusing to watch. But to Karen, they were nothing less than a mobile band of four-legged miscreants, agents of rural disruption and existential hazards to neighborhood equity. She gave Gus a special title, Commander of the Chaos, and accused him of deliberate, intimidating eye contact. One blistering afternoon, I was repairing a segment of fence close to the property boundary when I heard the unmistakable sound of a high-pitched screech. Karen, now wearing an impeccably fitted coral pink suit, was engaged in a strange performance near the fence, waving her arms around like she was banishing demons. Gus, appearing utterly unimpressed and mildly intrigued, was calmly munching on the perfectly trimmed hedges from her side, slowly tearing off a particularly treasured rosebud. He seemed to enjoy the chaos, occasionally pausing to glance up at her with a slow, thoughtful chew. "Mr. Blackwood, your horned hooligans of horticultural havoc are attacking my yard!" Karen screamed, gripping her pricey leather purse as though it were a life preserver, her expression twisted with revulsion. "This is an unjustified act of intentional botanical devastation. My award-winning swan-shaped topiary is now just a misshapen blob. It looks chewed on. I could sue you for calculated landscape sabotage and emotional trauma. I'm certain a tick jumped on my shoe. A tick, Mr. Blackwood. Do you understand the diseases they carry? Lyme, Rocky Mountain fever, and the utter horror of it. This is a public wellness emergency disguised as rustic charm." Gus glared at me. I saw malice in his eyes. I strolled over and leaned against a fence post, fighting back a grin. "Gus is just fond of leafy things, Miss Thorne. He's got good taste. And that tick? Likely hitched a ride earlier. He's a goat, not a threat to national security. Good taste? She choked out, placing a hand to her chest like I'd insulted her soul, her voice starting as a breathless gasp before swelling into a shrill cry. He's a shaggy, unwashed brute, and he's performing unhygienic digestive ejections right on my ornamental walkway. This is contamination. My feng shui is in ruins. My cat, Muffin, has entered an existential tailspin from their mere presence. She hasn't made a sound in days. She just sits, staring into the void, shaken by Gus's evil eye and relentless munching. Well, ma'am, where the greens are sweetest, the goats tend to wander, I said with a slight drawl, trying not to chuckle. And feng shui ain't really the guiding system on a ranch. Out here, we stick to plain logic. Logic? She howled. Your so-called logic is a direct attack on our cultivated sensibilities. I demand that you erect a boundary fence, electrified if necessary, to contain your caprine insurgents. Just their presence is offensive. That encounter triggered what I now refer to as the goat offensive. Karen began delivering carefully packaged samples of goat droppings to my doorstep, each one accompanied by a glitter-lined note outlining the supposed ecological disaster they symbolized. One read, "Hazardous organic deposit #9. Immediate danger to local plant life, including my prized hydrangeas, which now reek of barnyard and spiritual decay." Another, "Proof of rogue grazing operation. Ongoing forensic review. Potential link to goat-based espionage and psychic intrusion, alongside Muffin's emotional boundary being violated." Then the animal control calls began. Every day, new accusations were made, ranging from threatening looks with clear intent to menace, to deliberate outdoor elimination with malicious purpose, and loitering without personal hygiene compliance. Officer Rodriguez, a decent man who always looked one phone call away from quitting early, would drive out, check in on Gus, who without fail would try nibbling on the officer's clipboard, something that horrified Karen and amused Rodriguez, then sigh and write up another report. "She says Gus gave her toy poodle, Monsieur Fluffybutt, a lasting emotional injury just by staring at him, Mr. Blackwood," Rodriguez muttered one afternoon, massaging his temples. "Claims it made Fluffybutt develop a constant twitch and an intense fear of anything green or bearded. He now refuses to do his little obstacle routines anywhere near your fence." I just stared. "Gus probably needs glasses, officer. He likely mistook Monsieur Fluffybutt for a puffy little cloud or a weirdly shaped bush. Gus wouldn't hurt a fly, unless it was sitting on a delicious leaf." Karen's fixation intensified. She installed motion sensor sprinklers across her entire property line, directly targeting my goats. Gus, ever the clever and opportunistic critter, quickly learned how to trigger them for a refreshing midday soak, which he clearly enjoyed. This pushed Karen into yet another spiral of fury. She upgraded to motion-triggered foghorns that blared through the otherwise peaceful afternoons, shaking the windows of my farmhouse like we were under siege. I eventually relocated the goats to a far-off paddock, not out of concern for her, but to spare my own ears. It felt like living beside a malfunctioning lighthouse, only with goat-themed sonic warfare. Her newest scheme? She strung up tiny glitter-filled balloons on tripwires, designed to tag any goat that wandered too close. Gus, curious as ever, popped half of them with his nose, dousing himself in shimmering sparkles. Karen lost it, claiming he was taunting her. His new sparkly disguise was, in her words, a strategic act of rebellion and eco-sabotage. She even contacted a local news station, alleging I was training my goats to spread glitter contamination across Ridgebrook's immaculate landscape and destabilize its energy harmony. No one reported on it, but the tale quickly became neighborhood legend. Unburdened by reason or restraint, Karen discovered aerial surveillance. She purchased a cutting-edge drone, sleek and jet black, that hovered menacingly over my property like a furious mechanical hornet. She used it to log every supposed violation: my antique pickup, too old; a corroded eyesore and visual menace; my clothesline, too visible; a domestic disgrace marring neighborhood views; and even Red barking at a passing coyote, too loud; a hostile display of territorial aggression threatening community calm and the emotional wellness of all respectable pets. She'd parked the drone directly above my porch, recording my every move, clearly convinced I was organizing a conspiracy against the suburbs. She even stuck miniature HOA flags on skewers around my chicken coop, declaring it a symbolic perimeter enforcement measure. One bright morning, while I was fixing a damaged tractor axle, the drone swooped low, its camera lens catching the sunlight. Like a knife, whirring around my head like a mechanical hornet, I eyed it with amusement. My grandfather had taught me the art of stone throwing, with precision. I picked up a smooth, flat rock from the dirt. "Ready, Red?" I murmured. Red, alert as ever, growled low and wagged his tail. I flicked my wrist. The stone zipped through the air, a streak against the sky, and struck the drone's rotor dead on with a satisfying crack. It wobbled, sputtered, let out a weak, synthetic whine, and nosedived straight into Karen's flawless flower bed, demolishing one of her ceramic gnomes on impact. A few minutes later, Karen stormed onto my property, her expression aflame with theatrical rage. Clutching the ruined remains of her expensive gadget like a fallen hero, she trembled with fury. Her teeth clenched, her eyes ablaze. "You backwoods saboteur!" she screamed, waving the shattered drone at me, wires and parts dangling like entrails. "You destroyed my personal property! That was a unilateral strike on aerial sovereignty! That drone cost me $7,000! 7,000! Do you know how many handcrafted lattes that is? And my gnome, my garden guardian, you annihilated him. He stood for peace. I'm contacting the FAA. You'll face charges for unauthorized obstruction of airborne surveillance and possible economic treason. You violated airspace decorum and desecrated sacred gnome territory. This is federal, Mr. Blackwood. A blatant attack on my technological edge." I leaned casually against the tractor, doing my best not to chuckle. "It was buzzing too close to my hens, Miss Thorne. Sounded like a giant mechanical mosquito. Gave them quite the fright. I thought it was about to snatch one of my best layers. And as for your gnome, wrong place, wrong time. Gravity doesn't take sides. Sometimes, things just fall." "A mosquito?" she nearly screeched, her eyes bulging like a cartoon, her voice quivering with outrage. "That was a top-tier surveillance drone. Its purpose was to track your constant infractions, and you know it. You're a public hazard, a pastoral saboteur. I'm reporting you to every federal agency imaginable. You're probably a threat to national order, a sleeper cell for big agriculture. Or worse, an international agent using goats for reconnaissance. I bet you've got a hidden bunker where you train combat squirrels and militarized lawn gnomes. You are a clear danger to the sacred balance of suburban civilization." She spun on her heel and stormed off, muttering about farmland insurgents and acts of homegrown extremism, trailing ceramic shards and heavy breathing behind her. That airborne fiasco gave rise to what I now call the Great Bird Feeder Uprising. Karen, seemingly embracing a form of passive-aggressive ecological sabotage, installed a row of elaborate tiered bird feeders all along the fence facing my chicken coop. But these weren't regular feeders. They resembled miniature chandeliers made of glass and seed, brimming with dazzling exotic grains that I strongly suspected were allergen bombs. Her mission, I guessed, was to summon a swarm of wild birds so massive it would either infect my chickens or drive me insane with constant flapping, chirping, and droppings. To drive her point home, she began placing handwritten flyers on my side of the fence titled "The Feathered Takeover," predicting doom from invasive avian species and warning of bioharmonic dissonance. She even planted tiny scarecrows in miniature HOA uniforms, each turned to face my property like avian sentinels. I saw a golden opportunity. I moved the chickens to a quieter coop on the opposite side of the barn. Then, as a gesture of neighborly spirit, I spread a few bags of basic non-GMO corn feed near her over-the-top feeders. It didn't take long. The neighborhood's entire population of squirrels, raccoons, possums, and even a local skunk family descended on her setup like it was an all-you-can-eat buffet. Within a week, her obsessively trimmed lawn resembled a battlefield. Shredded feed bags, trampled grass, and muddy animal prints everywhere. Karen went into full meltdown mode, shouting about unsanctioned animal invasions, pest-driven property carnage, and Mother Nature turning against her. She dismantled all her feeders in a panic, but not before attempting to pin the blame on me, claiming the wild creatures were actually my pets, rural commandos unleashed to sabotage her backyard utopia. She repeated the story to anyone within earshot, her eyes wide and dramatic, fully convinced I'd formed a covert alliance with local vermin. To top it off, she took to patrolling her backyard in a safari hat and binoculars, declaring herself part of a new anti-critter unit. Occasionally, she'd spray a super soaker at rustling bushes, though more often than not, she ended up soaking herself. Karen's never-ending stream of grievances, now reaching cartoonish levels of absurdity, eventually drew the attention of federal authorities. But it wasn't the FAA knocking on my door. It was the Environmental Protection Agency. Not because of my compost pile, but because of Karen's wildly irresponsible, almost apocalyptic use of lawn chemicals, which were reportedly seeping into a small creek that flowed across my land. Naturally, Karen blamed my backward farming practices for inviting unwanted species, which she claimed left her no choice but to implement extreme preventative actions to preserve Ridgebrook's fragile suburban ecosystem, a phrase she repeated so often it practically became her battle hymn. The EPA sent Agent Ramirez, a tough, no-nonsense woman whose tired expression suggested she'd seen more nonsense than any one person should. Clipboard in hand, she met me at the barn, already sighing before she spoke. "Mr. Blackwood," she said, rubbing the bridge of her nose, "Mrs. Thorne has filed a laundry list of reports about your alleged ecological irregularities, negatively impacting her residents. However, initial testing shows quite the opposite. Her excessive use of synthetic lawn treatments is contaminating your waterway and disrupting local species, especially the migratory bird paths. We're also picking up trace amounts of some kind of exotic plant hormone in your soil, which she apparently uses to make her petunias, quote, fiercely radiant." Her words, not ours. She also believes these substances are essential to block out the ominous rural frequencies radiating from your land, which she claims are messing with her Wi-Fi. I gave her a nod. Makes sense. My minnows have been swimming in circles lately. Some of my wildflowers are glowing neon, and one tried to belt out a Broadway number. Agent Ramirez let out a breath, somewhere between laughter and despair. She's also accusing you of running an unlicensed biohazard neutralization station, and claims your free-ranging livestock are waging psychological attacks on her Persian cat, Muffin, leaving the poor thing in a constant state of dread and allergic to sunlight. She gestured vaguely toward my barn. "That'd be mine, yes, ma'am," I replied, barely keeping my face straight. "And those goats are mine, too. Muffin's just a little on edge. Gus isn't to blame." "Of course," she said, pinching her temples. "Let's just say Mrs. Thorne's understanding of federal environmental codes is unusually theatrical. She also filed a complaint about residential existential despair, supposedly radiating from your land. Says it made her orchids shrivel and her meditation apps crash. Meanwhile, Karen, convinced that her legal barrage was about to bring me to ruin, doubled down on her dramatic crusade. She began staging spontaneous public outrage rallies just beyond my fence, using a battery-powered bullhorn to voice her grievances about my appalling disrespect for suburban decorum and the creeping decay of rural corruption infecting Ridgebrook. She waved down anyone nearby, usually her dazed husband and the local mailman, to bear witness. One afternoon, she set up a tiny folding table by the fence, complete with a pitcher of iced tea and a plate of grocery store cookies, trying to recruit like-minded patriots. At one point, she even tried to detain Gus herself, claiming he was a threat to civil order and market stability, and had supernatural awareness paired with a plot to collapse Ridgebrook property values through psychological subversion. That mission ended with Gus calmly chomping a rose off her favorite bush while she screamed into the megaphone, convinced he was mocking her with his strategic chewing and smug digestion. He then sealed the performance by leaving a fresh pile on her pristine white sneaker. She didn't stop there. Karen began sketching chalk outlines around piles of goat pellets in my yard, labeling them things like illicit organic dumping, and confirmed case of agricultural hostility, complete with caution tape made from curly yellow ribbon. It was like living next door to a conspiracy theorist with sidewalk chalk and a vendetta. Sometimes she'd just sit in a lawn chair for hours, staring silently at my compost mound, mumbling like it might sprout legs and launch an assault on her begonias. One unforgettable afternoon, she hurled a bag of white powder over the fence while shouting, "The purification begins! You will all be sanctified!" Turned out, it was powdered sugar. Unfortunately, it attracted every ant and fly in a 10-block radius. She later accused me of being in league with the local insect population. The most outrageous showdown came during what Karen self-righteously dubbed her property value defense operation. She had purchased a portable floodlight and aimed it straight at my barn, under the delusion that spotlighting my so-called uncivilized structures would somehow boost the worth of her own estate. Every night it blasted like a searchlight. I let it slide for a week until my cows became restless and my chickens started laying at odd hours, confused by the constant daylight. One evening, I finally walked out there, Red by my side. "Miss Thorne!" I shouted, my voice echoing across the pasture. "Turn off that floodlight! It's stressing my animals out." Karen emerged dramatically from behind a trimmed hedge, wearing night vision goggles and a tactical vest stuffed with gear, clipboard, megaphone, and all. She looked like a suburban mercenary on a mission. "Mr. Blackwood!" she bellowed. "This is a targeted light deployment meant to dispel the dark, chaotic aura radiating from your untamed territory. This illumination is vital to Ridgebrook's energetic harmony. Your livestock's distress is simply their natural resistance to refinement." "It's just a giant spotlight, Karen," I said flatly. "You're messing up their rest." "Rest cycles?" she sneered, lifting the megaphone like a weapon. "They're resisting progress. This beacon represents the triumph of order over pastoral disarray. I am protecting my home value. This is a visual safeguard against rural intrusion." I exhaled deeply. "You've got 5 minutes, Karen. After that, I'm pulling the plug myself." "You wouldn't dare!" she howled, pointing the megaphone at me like a stun gun. "That would constitute suburban sabotage and property defacement. I'll call the sheriff. I'll call the mayor. I'll call the United Suburban Nations Council." I strode toward the blinding light. Red let out a low growl as if sensing my resolve. "Step away, Mr. Blackwood!" she shrieked, planting herself in my path. "This is a breach of personal territory. You are attacking my visual sanctuary." She lunged, grabbing for my arm. Not a smart move. I simply sidestepped, reached down and yanked the cord. The world dropped into silence and shadow. Karen froze, her high-tech goggles now useless in the pitch black. You electricity-wielding brute!" she finally sputtered. "You've unleashed total darkness upon Ridgebrook. This is an act of reverse illumination warfare." "I'm notifying Homeland Security. You're a direct threat to neighborhood infrastructure." I didn't respond. I just walked away, letting the quiet settle behind me as she stood there muttering, occasionally kicking the now lifeless light in frustration. And then came the lithium revelation. It began innocently enough. A few weeks earlier, a polite team of geologists had arrived to take some core samples. That wasn't unusual. People came through every so often looking for minerals and rarely found anything worth mentioning. But a few weeks later, a thick envelope arrived from a major energy company. Inside was a formal offer for mineral rights. I didn't understand half of it, so I called my grandniece, Lily. She was home from ag school and far better at legalese than I was. When she read through the document, her eyes practically popped out of her head. Lily came rushing out to the ranch, her face pale as chalk. "Uncle Silas," she said breathlessly, "your property. It's sitting on one of the biggest lithium veins in the entire Southwest. They're estimating millions, 8 figures, maybe more. This isn't just dry land. It's a jackpot for the electric revolution. Your goat-smelling, sun-baked soil is suddenly worth a fortune." I blinked. "Lithium? You mean like batteries? For those luxury electric cars Karen's always bragging about?" Lily nodded, and a slow grin crept across her face. "Exactly. That goat-infested dirt, as Miss Thorne so kindly calls it. It's now a treasure chest of clean energy. right beneath their picture-perfect yards. The company wants to begin drilling, quietly, discreetly, just under the property line. It's completely safe, won't disturb the surface, and they'll even install noise barriers during early operations. Word spread through Ridgebrook like a summer brush fire. And when Karen got wind of it, she didn't just lose her composure. She exploded in full theatrical meltdown. She stormed up to my gate, not with her signature clipboard, but with a crumpled printout of some article on lithium mining and a frenzied expression that made me consider calling animal control. Her hair was frazzled, and her whole body buzzed with outrage like a tea kettle seconds from whistling. You deceptive underground profiteer!" she shrieked, shaking the paper like she was casting a curse. "This is all a con! A slick manipulation, a mineral heist. You staged this entire scenario. You're planning to turn Ridgebrook into a toxic industrial crater. I knew you were hiding something deep, something treacherous. You're clearly working with international energy elites. This is eco-treason and subterranean treachery. Your goats? They're probably just cover agents trained to sense tremors. What's next? A missile silo? An alien base? I demand transparency. The entire Ridgebrook community demands the truth. My home value is collapsing faster than a stone in a dry well, thanks to your underground greed. My crystals are cracking under the pressure. Even my psychic warned me this would happen. She said the land was howling. I took a slow sip of iced tea, watching her unravel in the afternoon sun, the light catching the faded spray paint still on her garage. Seems like a lucky break, Miss Thorne, and it's all staying below ground. Lucky? She howled, her voice fraying with fury, her face twisted in fury. You're ruining everything! I bought into this neighborhood for its peaceful charm, not so I could live above a mining pit. I'm going to blow the lid off this whole thing. I'll expose your battery lies. You're a puppet for corporate energy. You're trying to pass off greed as sustainability. I heard the rumors. Men in trench coats, full moons, private meetings. Don't play dumb. What's really down there? Alien tech? A military vault? My crystal bowls keep rattling off their shelves. My aura's in chaos. You're ripping the spiritual core out of the earth for cash. This is an attack on the cosmic balance. She then stormed off and spray-painted in bold orange letters across her garage. Lithium lies. Silas Blackwood is a buried traitor. The planet is sobbing. Energy conspiracy. She tried to lead a protest march with handmade signs like, "No digging our dreams," and "Keep our jacuzzis mineral-free." Only her exhausted-looking husband, hiding behind a shrub, and one very confused teenager joined her. Still undeterred, she attempted to form a human barrier across my main gate, dragging her husband along in protest, screaming that I must halt all geological devastation. Red sat calmly in front of the gate, watching like a bored security guard, until she gave up and shuffled off, mumbling something about unyielding farm people and their equally stubborn mutts. Not done yet. She arranged little curse jars filled with glitter and wilted flowers along my property line, hoping they'd block out lithium spirits and harmonic interference. She also began hosting daily urgent HOA briefings where she demanded formal sanctions against me, but no one else on the board even bothered showing up. That lithium discovery changed everything. The energy firm, desperate to finalize their deal without neighborhood melodrama, pressured local authorities to resolve community tensions around my property. Combined with the ongoing EPA probe into Karen's chemical antics, now a full-scale federal case on illegal dumping and hazardous waste, and the mountain of video evidence Lily and I had gathered of Karen's escalating madness, the tide finally turned. The HOA board, completely drained by her calls, paint-splattered protests, and general humiliation of the neighborhood's image, drafted a new clause specifically for her. Persistent and egregious behavior unbefitting a resident. It was the beginning of the end. One brisk fall morning, two sharply dressed federal marshals pulled up in front of Karen's spotless McMansion. They weren't there to talk lithium. They were there for a laundry list of violations, false health reports, attempted sabotage of my property, specifically when she tried to cut through my irrigation line in a rage, leaving behind a glitter-covered note that read, "Your water will cry, like my shrubs and your destiny." sustained harassment that had crossed into stalking, threats toward my animal's emotional health, forged paperwork filed with the county, and an attempt to physically assault Officer Rodriguez during a standoff involving Gus and his alleged emotional terrorism. But the cherry on top? The EPA had uncovered a hidden chemical dump in Karen's backyard shed, unlicensed, undocumented, and leaking contaminants into the water table. Karen, clutching her now crumpled orange-smudged clipboard, was taken into custody while wailing about plots, deep state sabotage, and how I was merely a frontman for the lithium elite and a rural disruptor bought by Big Battery. She even accused the marshals themselves of being secret agents of geothermal tyranny, here to confiscate her amethyst collection. It was, without exaggeration, the most ridiculous and grandiose arrest I had ever witnessed. She tried biting one of the marshals, swearing he had a robotic hand designed to drain suburbia of joy, and kept screaming about my compost being an interdimensional portal of decay and my goats being mind-controlled emissaries of corporate evil. As they buckled her into the cruiser, her voice echoed through the neatly clipped hedges. "You haven't seen the last of me, Silas Blackwood. The energy of the cosmos will restore balance. You'll see. You'll all see. My spirit will haunt these lawns forever." The remaining Ridgebrook HOA board, completely drained, deeply embarrassed, and borderline terrified, held an emergency session. They quickly rewrote several rules, replacing Karen's obsessive bylaws with one centered on actual community wellness. The infamous compost monstrosity rule was thrown out. The one about threatening glances from livestock was laughed away. They even sent me an official letter of apology, which I accepted graciously, along with a basket of local honey and a promise to plant native wildflowers along the fence as a gesture of goodwill. Gus, of course, was invited to the ribbon cutting. They also volunteered to help clear my property of any lingering glitter, powdered sugar, chalk outlines, and hex jars. As for me, I, Silas Blackwood, unwilling local legend and proud survivor of suburban lunacy, returned to my peaceful routines. Drilling for lithium began quietly and cleanly, exactly as promised. The ranch remained untouched. I put part of the mineral lease funds toward creating a scholarship for kids in agriculture, the Gus's Green Future Fund. Gus seemed proud, though he mostly celebrated by chewing dandelions. I also gifted Lily a top-tier drone, not just for crop mapping, of course, but also for the occasional majestic video of sunset over quiet pasture, a poetic contrast to Karen's intrusive surveillance days. One sunny afternoon, I sat on the porch swing, Red dozing happily nearby. Lily, home for the weekend, helped me patch up the far fence along what was now a serene Ridgebrook border. The air was crisp, the only sounds a few lazy bleats from Gus's herd, the hum of my old tractor in the distance, and a soft breeze through the tall grass. No yelling, no megaphones, no airborne glitter bombs, just peace. "You know, Uncle Silas," Lily said, leaning on a fence post, "you really came out on top. Karen's in federal prison, and you're sitting on a lithium fortune." I smiled slowly, taking in the quiet. "Didn't set out to win," I said. "Just wanted to hold on to my land and my peace. Turns out that sometimes peace is the biggest win of all. And if it comes with a few $1,000,000 and a trail of crazy, well, that just makes the story better. Something for the grandkids one day, about the lady who thought my compost was a bioweapon and my goats were undercover agents." Somewhere in the distance, I heard a faint woof. It was Monsieur Fluffybutt, finally free from HOA paranoia and goat-induced trauma, living his best life in post-Karen Ridgebrook.